Americans are clearly blessed with vast expanses of land suitable for almost every type of outdoor recreation: hunting, fishing, off-road vehicles, hiking, camping, boating. They are among the recreational activities that for generations American families have enjoyed on public lands. In my home state of Utah, outdoor recreation opportunities are aplenty, from world-class skiing in the north to the Red Rock Country in the south. Utah is a truly remarkable place to enjoy the great outdoors. Utah is leading the way when it comes to accommodating outdoor recreation enthusiasts in business. Governor Herbert recently released the Utah State's Outdoor Recreation Visit, which we could probably kill a whole lot of trees if I put that in the record, but it is there. The state legislature adopted this vision, its first recommendations when they created the Office of the Outdoor Recreation. And I have initiated a multi-stakeholder process to harness eastern Utah's conservation, outdoor recreation, and mineral assets into a balanced, locally driven concept. Although our opportunities on federal lands are unsurpassed, they are not being realized as fully as they should, simply because federal land management has become often bureaucratic, always autocratic, and traditionally dysfunctional. I believe this dysfunction has catapulted federal land management to a forefront of the public lands issues, and I believe we are in the midst of a paradigm shift when it comes to the management of our federal lands. Put simply, a major reassessment of our federal land management apparatus is clearly needed. Public use is one of the fundamental purposes of public lands, and it requires an open and a fair process. Properly managed, our lands could provide far more toward our economic well-being, our recreational use, and our conservation interests. To be good stewards of the federal land, we need to encourage all three objectives, and they are compatible. It is not a zero-sum game. The land and all the nature of this big continent is resilient, it's dynamic, it responds well to good management. In many instances, public access and enjoyment depends upon the service of outfitters and guides. These outfitters and guides are typically small, locally owned businesses who operate on a very small profit margin. They provide jobs, they are integral to the communities that surround our public lands, and they provide essential expertise, training, and equipment to visitors. Increased fees, bureaucratic resistance, regulations, processing times, and especially litigation are driving up the costs of running private businesses on public lands and making a profitable operation difficult, putting many out of business, and threatening the continuation of the services that make visitor access possible and affordable for families. Unless there is a change in direction, a generation of Americans could lose this opportunity to participate in the outdoor adventure, and thousands of local jobs could be lost as well. In our hearing today, where we receive testimony from outfitters and guides, along with representatives from insurance companies and trade associations that support their work. These are skilled professionals dedicated to public enjoyment of our public lands, which provide services that government simply cannot. To truly appreciate the abundance of natural resources the Lord has blessed our land with, we should encourage, not hinder, a full range of public uses that our land can provide. Today, we're going to hear from individuals who experience firsthand how federal land managers are performing their task of providing open and fair access, and we're going to hear recommendations on how to overcome impediments to public recreation on public lands. So I'd like to specifically welcome Brian Merrill and Aaron Bannon. These gentlemen have been active participants in our Eastern Utah planning process, and have been very helpful in outlining the challenges and opportunities that we face with the outdoor recreation community. Mr. Lindsay, you're an insurance guy, and insurance companies benefit by bigger policies. You seem to be testifying against yourself in requiring these increases. Wouldn't that be a benefit to you, and why are you so adamant that this is one of the things that we're moving us in the wrong direction?
Well, if you look back at history, in 1985-86, Congress or National Park Service actually waived the insurance requirement for Grand Canyon outfitters because nobody would insure them. And so, the insurance market is very unstable, especially in these small recreational classes. Companies come and go. Many of the companies that have offered coverage historically have gone broke, leaving outfitters and the government exposed. Some admitted insurance companies have guarantee funds, but the limit on those guarantee funds is $300,000.
So what you're telling me is there's a tipping point in all this stuff.
Correct.
At which you actually create more harm than you create good. as you're going up the scale.
You create huge instability by having the limits go up and down.
The Canadian park system has about the same range of public activities as we do. Do you or maybe anyone else on the panel know what kind of insurance coverage is required in Canada?
Well, we've actually provided coverage for the Canadian Mountain Guides Association in the past. And in Canada, they don't have the legal system that we have here. They don't have the same medical system that we have here. So, I mean, the coverage up there is much less expensive because of the litigation system.
Okay. Bad one, though. Mr. McFarland, you spoke about the Salt Flats Recreation Area and the ability of working together in that particular, with the people working together to create something that's very positive. In your opinion, is that a structural situation or is that the personalities working together? Is this a personality issue or a structural issue?
It's a structural issue. The structure that was implemented has created positive personalities.
So the structure of having that cooperation actually put forth in that direction. But one of you, maybe it was Mr. Friedman, was talking about Vermilion Cliffs before?
Yeah.
Was that you? Mm-hmm. That came up with an entirely different result as Grand Staircase.
Correct.
Is that simply because of personality, or was there a structural cause that created that difference of decision?
I think it was leadership, absence of direction from either the monument manager or maybe from the Washington office about how to approach this programmatic environmental assessment process. In Grand Staircase, the recreation planner there took a more open approach to managing the monument, using adaptive management again as a tool to keep to not tie their hands as far as how they're going to deal with allocations of use. And for some reason, Vermilion Cliffs chose to try to come up with some specific limits without really looking at what was really happening on the ground. I can't really explain why they chose to go that route.
I appreciate you going in that particular direction. I think one of the things the state of Utah did and the governor did with his outdoor recreation vision is simply try to recognize that places like Utah, for example, is a public land state. It's always going to be a public land state. The issue is not whether it's public lands, but who is actually making the decisions on those public lands. Is it made by people who are there locally, or is it going to be made by people here in Washington? That's the kind of situation that I think you've identified some ways in which, based on personality, but perhaps by the structure of how we create those things, you can produce a better product. I'll just ask Ms. Kaufman, just in the last question I have, you talked about kind of the options either being big companies taking all those areas or your services being dropped. Which do you think is the more likely approach? Will big companies step in and do this, or are we just going to lose services and opportunities?
I think it depends how profitable the particular operation is. I mean...
But you're working on a very low profit margin, aren't you?
Well, yes, and I mean, my specific example is a corporation. It's not public. It's not a public entity. And what happened there, because I was unable to get the insurance, because I couldn't finance it, they no longer have riding up there. The corporation decided it wasn't worth it, to go ahead with the activity.
Thank you. I appreciate those. Yeah, I have appreciated both panels being here. You can time me. Yeah, I've appreciated both panels who have been here simply because we've illustrated in the old school, it was the idea that you either drill or it's wilderness. It's an either-or situation. I think what you've clearly illustrated is there is another option that's out there, and that sometimes wilderness is not the best designation for outdoor recreation. And indeed, if we are not using public lands for outdoor recreation, then we're going back to the era of the Normans when they came in and they took over the forest and they took over all the wildlife. Well, we're replicating some of that today. So I do appreciate the concepts of the indication of how we can use that. Sometimes land designation harms the way impedes our ability to use it. I appreciate your references to litigation, which I think drives some of the paralysis. I appreciate you talking about the transparency factor of the fees that we need. I do want to just, well, let me, Mr. Brown, let's say, for example, they start taking the secondary trails off of the system. What does that actually do to the primary trails?
Well, it concentrates use into those areas, and then you begin to have people complaining about crowding or potential carrying capacity issues, especially in wilderness.
So that becomes a counterproductive offense to go in there.
Correct.
Mr. Banyan, because I'm truly mystified by this concept of limitation of size, of the downgrading of size has to be there. And I don't know where I'm going with this, but I would like you just to simply talk about that, or maybe any of the others who wanted to. I am under the assumption that size is not a static number that should be there. Wouldn't it be impacted by the groups and the kinds of groups and the purpose for which they are visiting? And I'm also wondering that isn't our visitation rates going down as far as number as well as time spent in these particular areas, and the goal should be to bring that up. So what kind of matrix is being used to come up with these formulas that says you have to be downsized in some way?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's very perceptive in that group size is a one-size-fits-all solution managed for outdoor educators, managed for horse packers, everyone. Sometimes it's 20 heartbeats, and that's all the horses and people that you can take to a place. So there is no flat way that group size is implemented. I think that the way that Knowles operates definitely doesn't fall well under the group size limitation, because you'll never see a group size of 15 or 20 moving through a place. You'll see 5 or 6, just as Leave No Trace dictates. So it's not a good fit. And I'm sorry, the other half of your question?
I do not remember what it was either, so it's okay. I just wonder that sometimes our concept of science isn't really science. It's more like value structure that's being viewed as some kind of science here. Didn't one of you write in your testimony about the idea of a heartbeat rate instead of a person? Was that you, Mr. Brown?
Yeah, one of the ways they manage group size is by heartbeats, and that'd be a combination of stock and people. So it's kind of an unusual construct, I think.
So if you're fat like me, your heart goes faster, right? So does that count as more of a beat than somebody who's lean? And
I think you've given them another consideration now that we probably would not want them to know about.
Probably talk too much, okay. Let me say, unless there are other questions anyone has, I do appreciate your coming the distance out here to testify on this. This is one of those issues that I think we're going to be talking about. This is the overview, but we're going to be talking about as time goes on that obviously we have a different paradigm that needs to be here, and to make sure that the land's values that we put into place clearly allow for outdoor recreation. It's one of the purposes that should be there, and it should not be just forgotten or secondhand or an afterthought in what we're doing.